Alrighty, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our grades 6 through 12 Superintendent Reopening Forum. Welcome to those here in the auditorium with us this evening, as well as those viewing online at home. The purpose of tonight is to provide information of a general nature regarding our district reopening plans. I am Mr. Patrick McQueenie, the interim superintendent of schools here in Sparta. With me this evening is Mr. Michael Gregory, our director of district operations. And between the two of us, our goal is to provide information of how we got to where we are with our announcement of our reopening plans yesterday, as well as answer any questions anybody here in the auditorium has. I will make points in my remarks that address some of the comments and questions that I've gotten through emails since our release of our letter yesterday. And I'm going to start that by one of the biggest overarching, actually two questions that were posed to me over the last 24 hours. One is, why now? Why not last September? And the other question is, why not tomorrow? So I'm going to answer the second question quickly. Our school district is one of 4,000 stakeholders. We have 3,200 students, close to 800 staff members in our district. For us to be able to move our entire district from hybrid learning into full-day in-person instruction takes time. There's a lot of logistics, there's a lot of transportation concerns, food service concerns, instructional concerns, logistic concerns, health and safety concerns that we need to make sure we get right before we allow large groups of students back into our building. So that's the reason for the timeline that will result with us with March 29th returning for full in-person, full-day instruction. The first question was, why now? Well, there's mainly 3 points that point to why we're at where we're now. If you watch Governor Murphy's press conferences, if you look on any kind of social media or any type of Department of Health communication, the cases across the nation, across the state, and across our Sparta community are on the decline. It was important for us not to be reactive but proactive in starting to plan now as we watch these cases continue to decline and allow for a safer environment for the return of our staff and students to full-day in-person instruction. The second is we have had 6 months of working with our existing health and safety protocols. In my estimation and the numbers in our district in terms of the number of transmitted cases in our district bear out that our health and safety protocols are strong and do their intended purpose. To my knowledge and to date, we have had 1 case of transmitted COVID in our district. As you've seen from my communications out to the various school communities, we have had many more cases than just 1. However, those cases have come from outside of our school community and did not result in the transmission of the virus to anyone else within the school community. So we're very proud of the health and safety protocols that we've enacted to protect our staff and students. Finally, over the course of these 6 months, we've learned a lot more. Back in September, we did not know what we do now. And it's important to remember, hindsight is 20/20. So looking back now, there's things we could have done differently, better, worse, very different decisions that we made that we would have made differently now. It's important to remember that we are where we are now with the knowledge we have. And this is where we're moving forward from. So I'm going to briefly go through some of the details in my letter, talk a little bit about the timeline of where we're at, what the skeleton framework of the plan will be. I'll have Mr. Gregory talk about some health and safety protocols as reminders, and then allow those here in the auditorium to ask us any questions. So the first is the timeline. As indicated in my letter, January 19th, the New Jersey Department of Health reissued guidelines for schools to safely reopen and have in-person instruction. There were some modifications that loosened the restrictions on us and some of the expectations for quarantining and close contacts that began the conversation of we need to start planning to reopen our schools for full in-person instruction. It's important to remember our schools have been open with students in our building since September 8th. It's had varying degrees, but we have been open with in-person instruction. So this transition would be to be full in-person instruction. On February 12th or so, the CDC reissued guidelines for the reopening of schools. And in it, provided some clarifications and adjustments to their initial health and safety protocols and recommendations that had been made earlier in the school year that we were abiding by. Having those recommendations and guidelines, those amended recommendations and guidelines, I then immediately went to our our board return to school committee, proposed a plan that is outlined in my letter. 3 days later, on Friday the 19th, we met with our district return to school committee, which is 55 stakeholders from across the district, not just in the district, but in the community, which ultimately led to the plan that was communicated to the community on Tuesday. And just to reiterate, that plan is to return to full-day normal operating schedule on March 15th with the cohort schedule. So it'll be a full day of school. It'll be the normal schedules that we have grown accustomed to, well, not this year, but in past years, but still on that cohort schedule. So I don't have off the top of my head the cohort for March 15th. I believe it's an A week.
I don't know.
I would check our calendar on our website for details, but I believe it's an A cohort and then a B cohort. On March 29th, we will combine those two cohorts, and any student that is interested in in-person learning will be invited to attend beginning March 29th on full-day instruction. During the course of the year, it's important to note the virtual option is always there for students and families should they choose to take advantage of that. Students can move into hybrid or in-person instruction. If they feel uncomfortable or feel that they need to take extra precautions, they can always migrate back to the virtual instruction. For students going from virtual into hybrid, we are going to have 2 time periods where they're allowed to make that switch. This Friday, February 26th, I will send a letter out with a Google form that allows families to declare their intentions to move from one instructional method to the other or vice versa. That form will be due to the schools by March 8th, and then March 15th, those students that have elected to move from virtual to hybrid can then come into the building on the hybrid schedule. It's important to note for families making that choice on this first form, you will be making the choice to be hybrid for 2 weeks and then full in-person on March 29th. That's important to remember that it is not coming into hybrid and remaining in hybrid. It will move to the full in-person full day on March 29th. We understand that some families may not feel comfortable at this time for a multitude of reasons, and we're providing an opportunity in May to do the same. So the letter will come out approximately April 16th after our spring break. Families and students can then again provide their intentions to begin May 3rd in the full in-person model. It's again another important note. The only time you have to fill out the form is if you're changing instructional method. If you are staying in person or staying virtual, there is no need to complete that form. Also during this time, as a reminder for the remainder of the school year, 2 great service providers for us. Both have been great partners during the beginning of the year. Sodexo, our food service provider. The first point for them is that the free lunch pickup that is occurring a couple days a week here at the high school will continue through the remainder of the school year for those families interested in coming to pick up those meals. Secondly, Sodexo has been very responsive to working with the school district and with the principals to ensure food delivery to the different areas in the buildings, food preparation, and our students getting that food will have various health and safety protocols available to them to protect the safety of our students, our staff, and the workers for Sodexo. So they have been very good with us in terms of designing multiple places in the school buildings for students to get their lunch. We're looking at pre-boxed options that we'll be able to pick up so students are not congregating and standing in lines, getting that food and thereby jeopardizing some of the health and safety protocols that we've put into place. Finally, we also have for our kindergarten through 5th grade students before and after care provided by AlphaBest. They have been great partners with us, obviously, in the current pandemic. We did not get a large response for these before and after care programs, but they continue to be there for those families that need to avail themselves of them. If you go to our sparta.org website, on the right-hand side of the page is a menu, an AlphaBest link. There you can find details, information regarding the program, and opportunities to register for it. So that was the bulk of the information that I shared via the letter. I'd ask Mr. Gregory quickly to review some of our health and safety protocols as we start to implement this plan.
Thank you. Obviously, we will continue with some of the protocols we already have in place. First and foremost, most important, are our wearing of face masks. And I have to give a shout out to our kids and students. The principals said there have been no issues whatsoever with students wearing face masks throughout the day. Obviously, it's going to be a little longer day now, but they were somewhat surprised that they faced no issues. So we'll continue with face masks, social distancing, 6 feet apart, maximized when possible. Also, if your students are in school now, they'll notice that our hallways have been divided in some degree one directional and at least marked off to split the hallway, so they're only going in one direction on one side of the hallway. Same can be said of our stairwells. Our stairwells are either an up stairwell or a down stairwell, so there's no crossing of students going up and down the stairwell. Our buses, what we've done is, or what we continue to do, students will be spaced out as best as possible, 6 feet. Family members will be asked to sit together. On each side of the bus, a window will be open for airflow and air ventilation, which also brings me to our air ventilation in our classrooms. Mr. Tappan, our supervisor of buildings and grounds, had every system in every building checked at the beginning of the year and then again. We are required by law to have a certain percentage of fresh air exchange in the classrooms. We've upped that. We can control that, but we've upped that above the minimum. Also, and one of the biggest things we've done as we bring more students back is we've purchased a 3-sided divider, plexiglass divider for each student. Those will be used in the classroom as well as the lunchroom. So they will travel with them and they will leave those in school. That's basically also in between classroom disinfectant. Each classroom is equipped with disinfectant wipes that have a 55-second kill rate on SARS virus, all SARS virus, as well as an option of a spray, botanical spray disinfectant as well. So those are the things, but the 3-sided shield is one of our newest. Now, those are the things we can control in school. There are a couple things that we can't control, however you can. And one of the most important is that health form you fill out every morning. Since we are in the orange zone, which is a high risk, it now becomes ever more important if your child has any of those symptoms. And if you look at that form, it's 2 from column 1 or 1 from column B. They are to remain home for 10 days or a negative test. So it's important you follow that because those symptoms obviously are symptomatic of COVID, and if we bring that into the school. So when you fill that form out, please, if your child does present symptoms, follow that protocol. Also, the travel advisory. The travel advisory currently is if you travel outside of the immediate region, which is Connecticut, Delaware, Pennsylvania, or New York, you are required, your children are required to quarantine for 14 days. That may change as other things change. I'll go back to the symptomatics. You have to, if your child presents symptoms, you have to quarantine for 10 days or a negative test. In the past, that was 10 days quarantine, negative test, and or an alternative diagnosis. Since we are in the orange zone, that's no longer an option. So it's a negative test or a 10-day quarantine. And same thing with the travel advisory. Right now, it's 14 days, but we believe that may change in the next couple of weeks, and we will let you know when that happens. So those are the things we ask you to please cooperate with us and help us with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. So that provides a very general overview of our plans. Obviously, each school, each of our 5 schools, is adapting those general plans to fit the logistics of their building. So there's a lot of different factors from age level of students to the actual facility size, number of students attending, etc. So with that being said, I would ask if there's anybody here in the auditorium this evening that has any general questions, again, any specific questions regarding daily logistics that are more specific to a building, grade level, or classroom, I would ask you to hold those and share those with your child's building administrator. But if there's anything that we can answer, health and safety protocols, thought process, designing this reopening of our schools, Mr. Gregory and I are here to answer those questions now. So if you have a question, please just come up to the podium, we do need you to speak into the mic. That way, our live stream viewers at home will also hear the question, then our remarks. Yeah, anybody that wants to come up.
Mr. McQueenie, as far as the seniors go, is there going to be an opportunity for them to leave the building for lunch and study hall as they were able to do in the past?
Yes, seniors will still have their senior privilege.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the 3-panel divider thing? Like how big it is and clunky for the kids to move from class to class with that, if I understood that correctly?
It's 22 inches across the front, 16 inches down the side, and 24 inches high, and they do have handles on them. So they fold right up, and there's a handle right so they can carry them.
So the kids will also be able to have their locker breaks reestablished? They don't have to...
We're not going to use lockers. I know at the middle school and
No
the high
lockers
school, we're
at
not
this
going to use
time.
lockers.
The purpose of the no lockers is that we don't want the students congregating. So one of the biggest issues is we can't have them congregating and creating close contacts. So we are gonna ask them to carry, that's what we wanted to make sure that these dividers were portable enough that they would be able to get them and there's not gonna be a need to store a lot of things because we're not gonna have that available at this time.
And I believe the middle school and high school principals are working on a schedule where they'll return those trifolds to their at the end of the day to their first period class the next day.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Mr. McCreaney. I just have a general question in terms of, if the students would be able to flip-flop their schedule. For example, I'm going to give you one example. So let's say my son is actually taking in-person classes. But for 1 week, due to my nature of my business, if I have to go out of state, can he be actually virtual for that particular week?
Yeah, that's one of the schedule features that we've built in for circumstances such as that. What we would ask, though, is that students try to, for lack of a better term, have a purpose for doing that, just not, I don't feel like going today, so I'm gonna go virtual. But if they need to stay home for a week because of a parent having to quarantine or they need to quarantine, or if they're just not feeling well that day, we have designed it so they can participate in the class virtually. So students will be marked present if they are in the classroom or they're attending virtually. We want them to give them the freedom to be able to do that in the event there's a quarantine need or symptoms to potentially isolate themselves from the school.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hello, thank you for having this tonight.
You're welcome.
Can you give me an estimate of what percentage of the student body are currently in hybrid instruction? And then do you anticipate that increasing with the return to school plans? Or any more insight on the numbers of students that you're expecting to be coming to school?
Sure. So currently, as of today, fresh from the principals, the high school is 65% hybrid, 35% 100% virtual. The middle school is 75% hybrid, 25% virtual. Helen Morgan School is 80% hybrid, 20% virtual. Mohawk Avenue is 82% in-person hybrid, 18% virtual, and Alpine is 75% hybrid and 25% virtual. What we've seen in our most recent, when we returned from the holidays and came back in on the hybrid instructional model, we saw an increase in students coming in K-5, maybe K-8. I don't know if the middle
K-5.
school saw. K-5 definitely had an increase in the hybrid. The upper grades had an increase in the virtual option at that time. We don't know what to anticipate. What we're hearing from other schools is that usually at the higher grades you see more of a transition to virtual than coming in, and the lower grades are coming in more. So we're not sure. These numbers have been fairly consistent. It wasn't a mass change but that's where we saw the trends going. So right now, on average across the district, we have about 75% choosing to come in and 25% staying home on 100% virtual.
On a related question from that, at what percent would people be in person that you could still maintain the proper distance? So if, let's just say there's an increase, let's say in the middle school or high school to 80%, or is it 90%, or is it, at what point can't you maintain the distance, like 6 feet between the kids?
So 6 feet is the recommended that we're going to get to. The short answer to your question is we don't have a percentage because it depends on the classroom, it depends on the space, it depends on the numbers in that classroom. There's a lot of different variables. So that's why, not that we are ignoring the number of students in, but we are trying to build up the mitigation factors such that we can accommodate the differing numbers that would come in. So I don't have a great answer for that question, but I can tell you that we're reinforcing and strengthening all of our protocols because there will be some areas of the building where there will be 6 feet, there will be some where it will be less than 6 feet. We want to be prepared for them all, especially in a middle school and high school environment where they're changing and moving classes quite a bit. We're going to need to build in the mitigation factors regardless of the social distancing and the spacing, because we can't guarantee that it's going to be 6 feet. So we don't want anyone to think that it's 6 feet throughout our district. It's not. It is as much as we can everywhere, but that was one of the factors that we considered to balance the need for our students to be back in. We felt strongly that our students need to be back in the building, so we want to build up those mitigation factors to further enhance our health and safety protocols.
So would that be like if a particular classroom, let's say, looks crowded because there's a lot of kids in there or coming back, would the teacher or the person in charge of that room saying, we have a lot of kids here, we need to put in a mitigation sample? Like, how would that work? Or do you have an example of what one of those mitigation tactics would be?
Well, some of them are the dividers themselves. That is
Okay.
not something that we've had across the district. We just, they're, I think, being delivered next week, getting all of our dividers, and that's an example of a mitigation factor that we're going to have one for every student. In some of our elementary classrooms where they're doing small group or maybe one-on-one work, we have those existing, but now we're moving towards where those are going to be provided generally for all the students throughout the district. Some of the other things that that are recommended by the CDC is oftentimes if you walk into any of our classrooms, and it's not really grade-based, but you could see it at the high school or the elementary, is students are seated in pods where all the desks are facing each other. That will not be set up that way anymore. Another mitigation factor is that they're all pointed the same way, so it looks more like a traditional classroom. That will be in place. Classroom, another example, I think Mr. Gregory alluded to it in some of his remarks, is we have the ability to monitor or meter the fresh air exchange, and by law we're X amount percentage of fresh air exchange. We've increased that in all of our classrooms, so there's a stronger, more of a fresh air exchange. So those are a lot of the things that were highlighted through some of the CDC guidance that allows us to, when those classrooms or spaces are under 6 feet of social distancing, these are the layers of mitigation that we're putting on to protect the health and safety of our students and staff.
Okay, and then one last question I have
Sure.
so far is about lunch, and you said there could be different areas within the building where the kids
Yep.
could get their lunch and eat. Can you explain a little bit how you envision lunch and how the kids, if they can be with their buddies, or if their buddy is going to be dictated to go to a different area, let's say, or how is that? If you can
So,
explain.
I don't know which building. That'll help me a little
Middle
bit.
school.
So middle school. Middle school is going to be all in the cafeteria. They're able to space out with their dividers. When I talk about different areas, it may be, we have one food service line where they normally go through. It's possible, and I'm only giving you possibilities because Mr. Triburi and Sodexo will work together, there may be an alternate serving area in a different area. So they can dismiss maybe by table, you can go get your food, you can get your food, so they can stagger some of the lines that way to avoid congregating. Here in the high school, we're gonna make use of both gyms and our cafeteria to put tables in, to allow us to spread out as much as we can. Again, our goal is always 6 feet, and we will have 6 feet where possible, but there may be some instances where it's not. That's where we wanted to make sure we had those divider shields that Mr. Gregory spoke about that they can bring with them and use during their lunch period as well.
Okay, and I lied, I have one more question. So with the busing, if we in the beginning of the school year said we declined busing, but now we might need it if our kids are gonna go back full-time, are we allowed to change the busing, question as well?
Yes, you can change your bus. I'll let Mr. Gregory talk about the routes.
You can, and it's important if you do that, that you complete the form when that form comes out, because that's one of the things transportation is looking at, is what is our population on each bus. So yes, you'll have an opportunity,
Okay.
and if you do choose that, please make sure you fill that form out so we can get a better number.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Thank you. Just to piggyback off the bus question, this is an assumption of mine that they're probably going to have to put more buses out on routes now if, because all the children are coming back at the same time. Is that correct?
No, they'll have the same number of buses as they did before. What we're gonna have to do is, we don't have the ability to get more buses. We
Okay.
have barely enough bus drivers for the routes that we have.
Got it.
So to get additional buses and/or bus drivers and routes, one, I think would be physically impossible given the lack of bus drivers in the area, but also
Okay.
financially prohibitive. So we are going to use the existing routes we have. That means that, again, depending upon the ridership on the buses, there could be buses that are fuller, which would put students under the 6 feet social distancing, while others may have the 6 feet. It depends on the route and who's riding the bus. As Mr. Gregory mentioned, we are also looking at additional mitigation factors there, such as students get on the bus, they will be required to start seating in the back and work their way up to the front. That way you don't have people, passing and each other on the bus, and vice versa when they disembark from the bus, front off first, and they take their time coming out. The windows will be cracked. One thing to remember is I would not want to, well, today was a beautiful day, but over the past week, we necessarily wouldn't want to open the windows. We're 5 weeks away from when this will happen. We're at the end of March, looking at spring break, but we will have the windows cracked open, one on each side, to make sure the flow goes through, mask at all times on the bus, and taking precautions such as that to get our students to school safely. Now, we do understand parents could have some concern with that. They're certainly free to bring their children or ride the bus, but that's some of the mitigation factors for the buses that we're taking.
Okay. And so obviously the schedules will be changing as far as bus pickup and drop-off. So
The
when-
timing will be, correct.
Right, so when can we expect to have access to that information?
So that's part of, we'll have all that information. I'll share that in my letter on Friday. I can't give you a date, but I will make sure that we have a date that
Okay.
parents can check the Genesis Parent Portal. We'll speak to our transportation department over the next couple days and find out when they're going to. They've been made aware that we're going to full day, so it's already in process. But that communication that I send out on Friday with the ability for families to change hybrid to virtual or vice versa, I will include a date in there at which people can check the parent portal, and it will have the amended times for pickup and drop-off.
Perfect, thank you. And I have another question. I know there are some districts that have protocols that when a certain number of children or staff in a building test positive, and they're unlinked cases, that either a classroom gets shut down or a building gets shut down. Is that the case? Will that be the case going forward?
It's the same
What are the
decision
numbers?
tree that we have, that we got from the New Jersey Department of Health, based on
Okay.
cases in the building.
Okay.
A lot of that is dependent upon the contact tracing and is it within the building. Our intent with that is, should cases pop up, and we know they will, this is by no means going to eliminate the virus in Sparta, but it'll help us mitigate it and handle it and manage it better. Our intention is to, if we have to, we're gonna really localize where the quarantines will be. So if we see cases in Helen Morgan School, we're not gonna shut down the high school because Helen Morgan has cases. We're gonna really try and target that area in quarantine, so we're not keeping out a lot of people unnecessarily. A lot of that comes from the community transmission. What does the numbers in the community look like? The recommendation of the Department of Health, based on where they're seeing, is this an in-school transmission, or is this coming from outside? Is it coming from some big fundraiser in town that a lot of families went to and they can trace it? That may give cause for us to be able to temporarily quarantine, but that's where we have the virtual instruction. We'll just revert back to that, do the quarantine, check the cases, and then return. So that can be found if you go to our website, along with our COVID dashboard. Our original reentry plan has that decision tree in it from the Department of Health.
Okay, so is it a certain number of cases, or it's kind of an over?
It's kind of, they take a lot of different factors in, so
Okay.
it's not, 5 and you have to close. It's
Okay.
more of where are they coming from, how often have they come, did we see an in-school transmission, what does the community rate look like? Do we
Right.
see a rise in the community that we need to close this down so we prevent that from coming into school? There's a lot of different factors that go into it, so it's not really a set. Usually we start looking at 2 that are connected, and that's when we start looking at temporarily looking at contact tracing and a possible quarantine. But it's not 2 within the building. You could have 2 totally unrelated. That won't necessarily begin that process.
Okay, thank you.
And many of those decisions are made in collaboration with the health department.
Correct.
They are in constant contact with us, and when we throw a scenario out, because not every scenario fits that, if this, then that, they are very helpful and guide us.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns that we can address tonight from here in the auditorium?
Going back to what Mr. Gregory had said about if there's an exposure, then it's either 10 days at home or a negative COVID test. Was that correct?
No.
Okay.
There's a lot of if this, then that there too. If you're exposed, if you're a close contact, which means you've been within 6 feet, if I'm a positive case, if you've been within 6 feet of me for a cumulative 15 minutes over a 24-hour period, you are now a close contact. So then you're required to quarantine for 14 days of the last contact with me. And you're a close contact to me positive if you've been within those 6 feet, 15 minutes, within 2 days of either my onset of symptoms or the day I took a positive test.
Okay, and then my question is, so there was nothing to do with getting a negative test to return to school?
That was if you were symptomatic. If your child was symptomatic, which means he had 2 symptoms in column 1 or 1 symptom column B, he's required to stay home for 10 days or a negative test within those 10 days. Same thing with that they're moving to, I should say, is a travel advisory. Right now it's 14 days, but there may be an option coming soon with that. But the 10 days in test was if you were symptomatic.
Okay, so my question is, there seems to be some quality differences in the PCR test and the rapid test. Are
Right.
we requiring it be a PCR test?
We take either one.
Okay, thank you.
And just a point of clarification with Mr. Gregory's answer, right now, symptomatic students are required to quarantine for that 7 or 10 days, 7 days with a negative test, 10 without. That's because currently our region for the Department of Health, they call it a CALI index, COVID activity level index. Our region, which is Passaic County, Sussex County, Morris County, and Warren County, is in orange, which is high risk. When our region is in orange, those symptomatic individuals need to quarantine either that 7 or 10 days. If and when we go to yellow, symptomatic individuals do not need to quarantine. It's only the positive cases. So we, through Mr. Gregory's office and our nursing office, we will continue to keep the community updated where we're at. We are still in orange at this time, but we're seeing trends across the state and regions around us where that's trending down. We should be in yellow, hopefully sooner than later, but that will change some of the requirements, and we'll make sure that gets communicated out.
And let me clarify that. It's not 7 to 10 days. It's either a negative test or 10 days if you're symptomatic. If you're a close contact, it's 14 days. Now, if you're a close contact of a family member, so you have COVID and your daughter is in your household and you can't isolate from each other, then your daughter is your 10 days and then an additional 14 days. So you're better off getting COVID.
So if anybody just followed that logic, you get a prize. But I have to say, I gotta give
It's
a lot of
24 days if you're a close contact of a family member in the household.
So I have to give a lot of credit to Mr. Gregory. I jokingly call him the wizard of COVID. He has been on top of this and explaining this to families and students and staff. It is extremely difficult to stay on top of. Mr. Gregory all year long has done a fantastic job, so thank you, Mr. Gregory,
Thank
for
you.
that. And, I'll often call him, I got a situation for you, tell me how many days this would be. And he goes into that. So there are some interesting nuances, but we have great staff, and this is part of our dedication to the health and safety protocols for our district, is to stay up on it, make sure it's communicated, and clarify any issues that anybody has. Any other questions, comments, concerns from the auditorium? I would encourage those that are at home, if you have general questions regarding our reopening plans or about anything that Mr. Gregory and I said here this evening, please feel free to reach out to me or Mr. Gregory. If anyone here in the auditorium or anyone at home has any specific building grade level or classroom questions, please reach out to your child's building administration to get those clarified. Mr. Gregory, you have anything?
No,
to
I just
close
want to
with?
make sure I wasn't insensitive there when I said you're better off getting COVID. As far as quarantining, your quarantine time is extended if you're a close contact versus if you have COVID.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight, for coming here in the auditorium, for viewing at home. I want to stress to those here and those at home that this is something that we can control. It is extremely important that all of us do our part to make sure that we have a healthy and safe return to schools for all our students. I think everyone would agree that our students need to be in our schools and we want them here. But it's going to be important that we minimize our exposure outside of school, take the precautions we need to, take care of each other, take care of ourselves. Make sure that when students are sick, they stay home. It's not an absence. They can participate online. When you travel, please quarantine. It's required, but it just ensures the future success of our return to school for the rest of the year. So again, I thank those here in the auditorium for your questions, for coming out tonight and joining us. Thank you for those at home that are watching, and we hope that everybody stays safe and has a great night. Thank you again.